And the third session is it's more about the investors, maybe new players in Mozambique, and new sectors that seem to be coming up.
I think when we speak about Portuguese-speaking African countries and the opportunities we have there, we all mentioned oil, gas, mining, infrastructure, power. But today I bring, I will briefly cover a totally different sector that many experts now are predicting will become more valuable than oil in the decades to come, especially if we take into consideration the current rate of global population growth. I think you all figured out it's the agribusiness sector. Well, on the upsides, I think it's worth mentioning that Africa is now the only region with vast tracts of unexploited and underused arable land. Actually, Africa has 27% of the world's total arable land, which approximately is 200 million hectares, but only 13% of its population, so it can clearly be a net food exporter. It also has more than half of all the unused fertile land in the world, yet, based on recent figures from 2011, 37 African countries are actually net food importers, and 22 were even net importers of agricultural raw materials. The African Union that Elizabeth already mentioned is focusing also on improving the agricultural sector as a whole, and it has named 2014 as its year of agriculture. They also set a target of each African country, dedicating 1% of GDP to agricultural research and development investment. But so far, only 8 countries have reached that goal. And they also set a goal of national governments dedicating 10% of their total spending to agriculture and achieving productivity increases of 6% a year. On the downsides, I think that the problems in this sector in Africa are well documented. Too little irrigation, high post-harvest losses, weak marketing structures, poor power supplies, uncertain land ownership, and I will cover that in more detail, and poor access to finance for basic inputs. The agriculture sector is actually underperforming in comparison with other sectors, with average GDP growth of just 4% a year over the past decade. On the other hand, African governments have been reluctant to reduce trade barriers. There are now 8 regional trade blocs on the continent, each with different rules and regulations on cross-border trade in agriculture, produce and processed food. Is the transfer of land to foreign investors. This transfer of land usually entails resettlement of local communities, so cooperation with local communities is a key issue, and this is a highly sensitive politically and socially. In Mozambique, the upsides, I think that, Mozambique is included in the top 10 land-abundant African countries in terms of both agriculture and arable lands. Agriculture represents roughly 20% of the GDP in Mozambique, employs 90% of the women workforce and 70% of the men working force. There are 36 million hectares of arable land, only 10% being currently used for agriculture. There are 3.3 million hectares of irrigable lands and 55 million hectares of forest cover. There are also 10 agri-ecological zones with different potential and a huge variety of products. Due to this immense land wealth, it has, in the recent past, attracted significant foreign agribusiness investments. About 2.7 million hectares were allocated to foreign investors between 2004 and 2009, representing nearly 5% of the total agricultural land in Mozambique in 2009. I think there's a real opportunity here because investing in new technology will bring huge improvements on the agri-industry in Mozambique. Some of these agribusiness projects may fall within the scope of these regulations, PPPs and large-scale projects. So should that be the case, there are some local content rules and Mozambicans have to take part of these projects.
Next, we're going to turn to Francisco Ramirez, who's going to discuss these matters from a private equity perspective.
work in. As everyone in this table surely knows, it's not the easiest of markets, but the opportunities are endless, I would say. Some of them are here, agriculture, as it was mentioned before, of course, commodities, energy. But I think one of them, which is missing here, and it's something that not only investors, but we as a fund are also seeing a lot of opportunities here. It's the general industry and consumer services area, because this development of the economies in sub-Saharan Africa has created an increase in urban population and consumer population as well. So opportunities in sectors or consumer-derivated sectors are also increasing. I would say that the profile for the investor is now also changed. Not only DFIs are looking into Angola and Mozambique, but now DFIs are looking at it in a different way. They expect not only the responsible investment principles that before they were more concerned with, but they're also looking for high yield returns as well. The private equity business in Mozambique is giving its first steps, but I would say that possibilities are endless. But especially the boots on the ground have taught us and taught me as well a lot of local counsel, which has proven to be very helpful and as professional as most of the international law firms that we work.
And Andre is going to address how global firms are assisting their clients and their investments in Africa and Mozambique in particular, and what exactly they're looking for in business.
But we need, of course, this knowledge, the local knowledge, to understand how can we adapt local rules to raise local way of doing business to the international benchmark. How can we do that? Of course, working together with local counsel mainly. We have to think on the background concept, common law and civil law. We have changed ship, yes, we have, and we can't force local laws to accept crazy foreigner local figures. And we can't force Mozambique or Angola to have security agent. We have to find out different ways and alternative ways, and that's the reason why we have to work together with local counsel, because we did that in different jurisdictions. We have this know-how, and they have know-how of local laws. Let's try to find out all together the best solution. And that's very important. How can we help creating precedents on international clients? Of course, that we have to filter this information, help them to identify the risks, and help them mitigating these risks.
And then finally, to address Islamic finance, what role it has been playing and what role it can play.
Trade finance, come up with some bullet points here. We've got talking about agriculture, consumer services, commodities, oil and gas, mining, telecoms, electricity. These are all areas where the Islamic investor community is interested in. So I doubt you'd be interested in retail finance, Islamic finance in Mozambique, but certainly facilitating trade and investment in infrastructure. And there are various structures that can be used Islamically friendly. Now, in terms of legal, this is a lawyers' conference. What I would like to stress is try and avoid the use of the word Islam, Islamic, or Sharia in the documentation. Most of the international documentations, Clifford Chance, etc., are done out of English law. So avoid reference to Islam and Sharia because that isn't codified, and that's open to dispute, interpretation, mis-selling after the event. Because the rules, the interpretation changes, and what was Islamically compliant 10, 20 years ago, and I've been in the space since 1987, and what was compliant then is certainly not compliant. A lot of it's not compliant now, And what's not compliant today could be compliant in 10 years' time. So that changes. So make sure it's in plain English or plain Portuguese and codified according to local law of some place. So it's basically Islamic finance, trade finance, profit and loss sharing. It's encouraging of equity investment, private capital. There are prohibited items, no pork. Presumably there's a lot of pork in Mozambique.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you next year again here at Chatham House. And any other questions, please let us know afterwards. Thank you.